Hello, everyone. This is Dr. David Branham. I'm back with another video. This video is on the federal court system in the United States. It's going to be a very short video, but it'll just basically break down how the system works, what kind of courts we have, and who has served on our United States Supreme Court. Let me start by sharing my screen. There we go. This video is the federal courts of the United States. We'll start with the federal court system. As you can see that little picture over there on the right-hand side, we have three levels of courts in the federal system. Now, city systems, county systems, state systems, they're all different. Some of them mirror this pretty well, like the Texas system kind of mirrors this, but it's got some alterations. This is the federal system, and you have three levels of courts in the federal system. You have the U.S. District Courts, you have the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals, and then you have the U.S. Supreme Court. So we'll start with that federal court system, the district courts. The U.S. District Courts are trial courts with no appellate jurisdiction. In other words, all these courts start a trial. When the trial begins, they run that trial. And that's the only job that they have, these district courts. There are 94 of these courts across the country, including U.S. territories. So each district has at least one judge, and there are 682 judges overall across the country. So you can see that the courts vary in size. All these district courts have judges that are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. Federal judges are appointed by the president, approved by a majority of the Senate. There is no term limit. When a federal judge is appointed, including district court judges, appeals court judges, and Supreme Court, there is no term limit. That judge sits until he or she either dies or resigns. It's a lifetime appointment. So in 2023, the Central District of California had 28 district court judges. It's the largest of any district. So you have that Central Court District in California with 28. You have that District of Guam in 2023 that had one judge. You also had the District of Northern Mariana Islands. They had one district court judge. So you have some district courts with one judge, then you have several different numbers of judges, including 20 all the way up to 28. So the federal court system starts with that U.S. district courts. Federal court, almost all cases start in U.S. district court if it's a federal case. And so that is the U.S. district courts. Then there is the federal appellate courts. And these appellate courts don't hold trials. What they do, there's 13 of them, 13 circuits across the country. They review decisions of trial courts for errors of law. Okay, so these circuits they have districts across the country, these 13 districts across the country. They have one at large that covers the entire country. They have one in Washington, D.C. alone. And you wonder, well, why just one in Washington, D.C.? Well, it's a federal court system. So a lot of cases are there. So you have one complete appellate court circuit right there in Washington, D.C. So you have these 13 appellate court circuits, and all they do is review decisions of trial courts for errors in the law. Now, when you're watching trial courts, when you see an objection, that objection is getting noted. That objection is a potential appellate court case. Because if the judge were to rule wrongly in those, it could cause the appellate courts to say, look, you need to go back and have a new trial because of that. Now, just because a judge rules something wrong does not mean that there will be a retrial. Sometimes the appellate courts will just say, yes, the judge was wrong. However, it had no impact on the trial. As a matter of fact, that's almost always the case. But if they do find that the error actually had an impact on the trial, then a new trial will be ordered and we'll go down to district court and have that trial. That's what the appellate court cases do. Now, they get a lot of cases from the states as well as from federal courts. So states may hear appeals from the states in the appellate courts as well. There are 179 federal appellate court judges. So you can see there's about 1/4 of the number of judges as there are in district courts. All appellate court judges, just like the district courts, are appointed by the president and approved by a majority of the Senate. So you need 51 votes in the Senate, and they're approved. There's no term limit. It's a lifetime appointment. So that's how the appellate court judges are selected. Then you have the Supreme Court. Now, what does the Supreme Court do? The Supreme Court's function is to give the final say on constitutionality of any case brought before it. So it's the Supreme Court that determines really whether something is constitutional or not. If you pass a law and it's challenged as being unconstitutional, a law that goes against the Constitution is the superior document in all kinds of law in the United States. So any law that any legislature passes anywhere, federal, state, local, city, any law that violates the Constitution that is passed will be deemed unconstitutional. And a lot of Supreme Court cases are these kinds of cases. Matter of fact, almost all of them are these kinds of cases. They usually work their way up to the chain, and then after they go through the appellate court circuits at the federal level, most of the time that's when they write a writ of certiorari and say, look, I want the Supreme Court to hear this case. So that is the time when the Supreme Court will hear these cases. And most of the time, the Supreme Court hears less than 100 cases a year. So it's not unusual for this, just to have a few cases to go to the Supreme Court. Most of the time, the Supreme Court will just say, no, the appellate court's ruled. That's the ruling. That's what will stand. But when there is an exception, they will take the case. And these are almost always high-profile cases. So for the most part, the Supreme Court is an appellate court. It's not an original jurisdiction court. There is a couple of exceptions, but it's not worth getting into. The Supreme Court is basically an appellate court. This is often the interpretation of a law passed or an executive order by the president. For instance, sometimes the president runs an executive order. Maybe a state attorney general will sue and say that executive order goes against the Constitution. If the Supreme Court decides to hear that case, then they will rule on the constitutionality of that executive order. Same thing can happen with any law passed anywhere. It's often the interpretation of a law passed or an executive order by the president. And it's important. Constitutional cases are far more often about state laws than they are about federal laws. And you can tell why, because the states pass a lot more laws as a group than the federal government does. So you'll hear a lot about state laws. When state sessions, abortion is typically been an area where you get a lot of appeals to the Supreme Court. And, when the Supreme Court takes them, then it's a high profile case. And almost all of those are state laws where the state restricts abortion in a way that they feel that people feel is unconstitutional. That's when the Supreme Court will hear those cases. What cases does the court hear? As I said, the Supreme Court hears all cases where at least 4 judges of the 9 on the Supreme Court. There's 9 justices on the Supreme Court. If 4 justices say, look, I want to hear this case, then the case will come. And that will be, it could be a 5-4 case against. But in almost every case, when the Supreme Court says come, that means that there's going to be basically a big change in what is the norm as far as what the law goes. And that means, that a lot of Supreme Court justices have an agenda and they're looking for cases. And when they find it, they'll call for that case. All cases in the Supreme Court are majority rule. Since there's 9, typically, as long as the judge isn't recusing himself or herself, or as long as the court is full, then it's a 5. You need 5 justices to get a majority. If the court is not full, then that changes, obviously. In most cases, the vast majority of the time, there are 9 justices on the court. So, who appoints Supreme Court justices? Just as the other federal judges, the United States president appoints all Supreme Court justices. That appointment goes to the Senate, where the Senate has to confirm it with a majority vote. And all appointments are lifetime appointments. It doesn't mean you have to serve for a lifetime, but it does mean that if you want to, you can, and you can have the option of resigning as well. How long do Supreme Court justices serve? There are no set lengths of Supreme Court terms. There's no term limits. So it's a lifetime appointment. Younger justices, when they're appointed, will serve longer than older justices because they have a longer life. In other words, there are no Supreme Court term limits. Once nominated and confirmed and appointed, SCOTUS stands for Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS justices serve until retirement or death. That's the reason why you see a lot of presidents, you think, okay, the people they're appointing are fairly young. They want a fairly young justice because they want that justice to stay on the court for a long period of time. Because a young justice will mark a president for maybe 3 decades, maybe 4 decades. It's a possibility. So somebody like Amy Coney Barrett, when Donald Trump appointed her, the expectation was she would serve for another four decades or so. Very young, very talented, and a young mother should live a long life. That's the thought, that this justice will stay on the court for a long period of time. And the same with other justices too. Can the Supreme Court justice be impeached? Yes. Any government official at any level may be impeached. The process for impeaching a Supreme Court justice is the same as the process for impeaching a president. All you need is a simple majority in the U.S. House to say, okay, we're going to have a trial. That's all it is. The United States House of Representatives says, we want to have a trial on these articles of impeachment. This is what this person did. We want to put him up before the Senate on trial for impeachment. From there, removing a justice requires a 2/3 supermajority vote for conviction in the Senate. So you need more. It's a higher standard, and it's the Senate who actually does the trial. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will come and preside, assuming that it's not the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court getting impeached. But that is a Senate level trial, and you need 2/3, 67 votes out of 100 to get the impeachment. No SCOTUS justice has ever been impeached and removed from their seat on the bench. It has never happened. Okay, so first, who was the first Black Supreme Court justice? That was Justice Thurgood Marshall. He was the first African American Supreme Court justice. He was actually the attorney in Brown versus Board of Education. He's the one that won that case in 1954. It was a 9-0 vote by the then Warren Court that said that schools had to be desegregated, that segregated schools were a violation of the Constitution, and there was no such thing as separate but equal. That separate, by definition, was unequal. So it was Thurgood Marshall who won that case. That catapulted him into a person of interest for the Supreme Court. So in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson appointed him to the Supreme Court, where he served for 24 years. When he retired in 1991, George H.W. Bush appointed Clarence Thomas to replace him. Clarence Thomas' Senate confirmation was very, very difficult. He ended up getting 52 votes was what he got to get the confirmation. And there was a lot of controversy about things he had done while he was a boss at the Equal Opportunity Employment Agency. And that was very contentious. A lot of people thought that it was very unfair the way he was treated. Other people thought they disqualified him as a judge. It was kind of the start of our new culture of really antagonistic politics that occurred. And so Clarence Thomas barely made confirmation, but he did. So he entered the court in 1991. He's been on the bench ever since. So he has been a long-standing justice and one of the most conservative, if not the most conservative justices that has ever been on the court. Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first Black woman, and she was appointed in 2022 by President Biden. The first female Supreme Court justice was Sandra Day O'Connor, who was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1981. And O'Connor served about 24 years till 2006 when she retired from the bench. She was a fairly conservative justice, not completely conservative, not the most conservative during the time of her time on the court, but she was a conservative justice. She was the first woman and the first Hispanic justice appointed, also the first Hispanic woman justice appointment or Latina woman was Supreme Court to the Supreme Court was Sonia Sotomayor, who was selected by Barack Obama in 2009. So those were the big firsts on the Supreme Court. Thank you very much. It's a short video. The questions will be on the test. And so, as I always say, if you have any questions, let me know. You can email me. I'm happy to meet with you. And I hope this helps you out with the test. Anyway, remember that the PowerPoint will be also added along with the video URL. So have a great day, and I will see you soon.